Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Imagine trying to coordinate a nationwide synchronized alarm clock to stop a geopolitical crisis.
Okay, that sounds like a massive logistical headache.
Right. And now, imagine trying to execute that massive feat without the internet, without smartphones, and, well, without reliable personal timepieces. Because the year is 1712.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes the whole picture.
It really does. And that is the historical reality we are unpacking today. We are looking at an era where people genuinely believed that coordinating a specific action at a specific hour across an entire country could, quite literally scramble the strategies of hostile empires.
It is a staggering concept when you think about the sheer mechanics of it. We are so used to instant communication today. So the idea of organizing thousands of people across cities and countrysides to do the same thing at the same moment in the 18th century, it feels almost impossible.
But it actually happened.
It did happen, yeah. And the documentation of that event became a crucial piece of evidence for one of the greatest theological minds of the era.
Spot on. For this deep dive, we are examining a specific excerpt from the writings of Jonathan Edwards. He wrote a piece with a very long, very 18th century title.
They loved their long titles back then.
They really did. It is called An Humble Attempt to Promote Explicit Agreement and Visible Union of God's People in Extraordinary Prayer for the Revival of Religion and the Advancement of Christ's Kingdom on Earth.
Yeah, that is definitely a mouthful.
It is. But we are zooming in on a specific section of that work titled The Charge of Novelty Answered. And within this section, Edwards brings forward a fascinating historical document from the year 1712 to defend his own proposal.
Right, because Edwards was dealing with a very practical, very human problem. He had proposed a unified, scheduled movement of prayer across the colonies and across the Atlantic. He wanted a coordinated effort.
Yeah, he got some pushback on that.
Oh, heavily. The immediate criticism he faced from his peers was that this was a, quote, new thing. His critics claimed that organizing prayer in this structured, synchronized way was something never put in practice in the church before. They viewed it with intense suspicion.
Which is such a universal experience, honestly. If you are listening to this right now, think about a time you pitched a good idea at work, or maybe suggested a new method in a community group, only to have it shot down immediately with that classic line, we've never done it that way before.
Yes. It is the quickest way to kill an idea.
It is an incredibly frustrating wall to hit. So this deep dive is going to look into how an 18th century thinker handled that exact objection. We are going to examine the concrete historical precedents he used to prove that unified scheduled action is a duty, not some dangerous novelty. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what is great is that Edwards does not just aggressively deny their claim. He takes a much more analytical approach.
He really breaks it down, right?
He does. He slices the concept of newness into different categories. He concedes that, sure, if you look at his proposal, there might be something circumstantially new in it. But he refuses to let his critics throw out the entire substance of the action just because the circumstances surrounding it have been updated.
He forces them to look at the core actions involved.
Precisely.
It reminds me of a scenario you might see in a modern office. Imagine someone complaining that a group video call is this terrifying, dangerous novelty.
Right, like they're scared of the technology.
Yeah. You would look at them and say, well, talking to each other is not new. Scheduled meetings are not new. Gathering multiple people to discuss a single topic is not new.
The only thing that is new is the screen.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. The circumstantial method is updated, but the substance of what we are doing is entirely historical and proven. Edwards is essentially telling his critics that they are getting hung up on the screen and forgetting that the church has always had meetings.
That is a highly accurate way to frame his logic. Edwards asks his critics a series of rhetorical questions to prove this. He asks, is the duty of prayer new?
Obviously, no.
Right. Is it a new thing for people to expressly agree on what they're going to ask for? No, that happens constantly in any congregation.
Sure, people share prayer requests all the time.
Yeah. Is it new for people to agree on a specific time and place for united prayer based on their own discretion? No. And then he points out that praying simultaneously across different separate locations is a common practice.
How so?
Well, congregations already do it during appointed days of fasting, where churches across an entire region agree to observe the same day.
Oh, I see. So he takes this scary word, novelty, and just neutralizes it by showing that every single component of his proposal is a well-established practice.
Yes. The only thing he is doing is combining those established practices in a slightly more coordinated way.
But, I want to push back on Edwards a bit here. Does he see this newness as a flaw he has to apologize for. Because it seems like he actually wants to change their behavior, which means he is introducing a disruption.
You are picking up on a crucial pivot in his argument there. He sees the disruption not as a flaw, but as a necessary correction.
A correction, okay.
Yeah, Edwards points out that if the new thing is simply deciding not to be negligent anymore, if the novelty is that people are resolving to be more frequent and fervent in a duty they have previously ignored, then that is a new thing that ought to be.
It is a required reform.
Yes.
So he flips the accusation. He's basically saying, yes, being diligent is new for you because you have been lazy.
Pretty much. It is quite a bold stance to take with your critics.
It is bold. And it highlights a critical psychological principle. Correcting past negligence almost always looks like an unwarranted novelty to those who have grown comfortable with the status quo.
Oh, absolutely. If a group of people has been operating at 20% capacity for decades, someone coming in and demanding 80% capacity is going to feel like a radical innovator.
But Edwards argues that the baseline was wrong in the first place.
Right. Returning to the correct baseline is not innovation. It is simply ending a period of negligence.
Let us pause on that for a second because, if you are listening to this and thinking, I'm already exhausted at work or in my family life, and someone demanding I go from 20% to 80% sounds like another massive burden, how does Edwards reconcile that? Is he just cracking the whip here?
Not at all. He is operating from a very specific theological framework. Edwards makes the case that visible express agreement to unite for what he calls extraordinary prayer is an absolute duty.
Let's define that term, extraordinary prayer.
Sure. In the theological tradition Edwards belonged to, there is a distinction between ordinary and extraordinary means. Ordinary prayer is your daily worship, your Sunday service, the regular rhythms of life.
The baseline.
Right. Extraordinary prayer is a special season, called for by providence, where believers step outside their ordinary rhythms because the historical moment demands it.
It is an escalation.
Yeah, a major escalation. Furthermore, Edwards points out that this kind of unified extraordinary action is prophesied to happen before the time of the church's promised glory on earth.
That brings in his eschatology, his view of the end times. He was a postmillennialist, right?
He was, yeah.
Meaning he believed that through the preaching of the gospel and the extraordinary prayer of the church, the world would gradually experience a golden age of righteousness and peace before the final judgment.
Precisely. So for Edwards, this coordinated prayer is not just a nice idea. It is the engine that drives history forward toward that promised glory.
It is the mechanism of change.
Yes. Because it is a duty, and because it is a foretold necessity for the advancement of the world, it cannot remain just a theoretical concept. Edwards is intensely pragmatic here.
He wants action.
He argues that if this unified action is a duty, then the people must come into some method to render this practicable.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of his proposal. But I have a serious question about this idea of rigid scheduling.
Go ahead.
When we talk about organic community movements, doesn't creating a highly structured, scheduled method run the risk of ruining the very thing you were trying to foster?
How do you mean?
Well, doesn't it risk making a spiritual or relational practice feel forced? Like you are just checking boxes on an administrative form instead of actually engaging with it.
That fear of institutionalizing something organic is very common. We want our movements to feel spontaneous and real. But Edwards' reasoning operates on a completely different track.
Okay, what is his track?
To him, an ideal means absolutely nothing if it cannot be executed. You can have the most beautiful organic desire for unity in the world, but if you do not have a method to make it happen, it remains an abstract wish.
But doesn't the structure eventually choke out the sincerity? If I am only showing up because the clock says it is time to show up, the fervency is kind of gone, isn't it?
Edwards would argue the opposite. He would say that without setting fixed seasons that return at certain periods, people will simply rely on their good intentions.
And good intentions evaporate.
They evaporate in the face of daily friction. People get busy, they get distracted, they forget. Edwards understands human nature. He knows that if you leave a duty to happen whenever people feel organically led, it will never happen in a unified way.
So the schedule is not the enemy of the organic movement.
No, it is the enabler of it.
It is the skeleton that allows the organic movement to actually stand up and walk.
That is a perfect analogy. Without the rigid skeleton, the organic material just collapses on the floor. The structure guarantees the action. Edwards highlights this concept of visible express agreement.
Visible union.
Yeah. It is not just about the action. It is about the visibility of the Union acting as a token of solidarity.
Why does it need to be visible, though? Why couldn't everyone just secretly agree to do it whenever they had a free moment on their commute?
Because the visibility itself functions as a mechanism of encouragement. When people visibly and expressly agree to a method, they are making a pledge to each other. It creates a shared reality.
Ah, I see.
If you know that hundreds of other people are stopping at the exact same fixed seasons to engage in the exact same action, it provides immense psychological reinforcement. You are no longer an isolated individual trying to drum up motivation on your own.
You are part of a synchronized collective.
Yes.
That alters the entire atmosphere of the action. And to prove that this highly structured method is not a novelty, Edwards pulls out this fascinating historical receipt.
He really brought the receipts.
He did. He cites a paper that was dispersed abroad in Great Britain and Ireland, originating from London in the year 1712.
This document was circulated during the latter end of Queen Anne's reign. The paper was entitled, "A Serious Call from the City to the Country to Join with Them in Setting Apart Some Time, viz. From 7 to 8 every Tuesday morning, for the solemn seeking of God, each one in his closet, now in this so critical a juncture."
I am just marveling at the hyperspecificity of that request. From 7 to 8 every Tuesday morning.
It is very specific.
How does a paper like this actually get dispersed abroad in 1712? We are talking about an era long before mass communication.
The mechanics of it are fascinating. In early 18th century London, you had a very active print culture. Pamphlets and broadsides were printed rapidly and distributed through coffee houses.
Coffee houses.
Yeah, they acted as the main hubs of political and theological discourse. From there, these documents would be carried by the postal system, literally riders on horseback, out to the country towns.
Okay, so it gets to the country. Then what?
Country parsons would receive the pamphlet and read it aloud from the pulpit on a Sunday, disseminating the message to the entire parish at once.
So they receive this message asking them to synchronize their schedules. But how do they actually synchronize?
What do you mean?
Well, how do people in the country and people in the city know it is exactly 7 in the morning on a Tuesday? It is not like everyone had a perfectly calibrated digital watch in their pocket.
Oh, right. They relied on community timekeeping. Most people did not own personal pocket watches, and even if they did, they were highly inaccurate.
So what did they use?
They relied on the town clocks and church bells. The church bell ringing at 7 in the morning would have been an audible, community-wide signal.
That makes the psychology of it even more striking. You hear the bell ring, and you know that your neighbors and people in the next town over and people all the way in London are hearing a similar bell and going into their closets at the same time.
It is a powerful shared experience.
But why pick such a specific and, frankly, somewhat inconvenient time? Why not Tuesday evening when the work is done? What does setting a somewhat inconvenient hour do for a group psychologically?
Specificity creates accountability and shared effort. By demanding 7 to 8 in the morning, the organizers were asking people to disrupt their normal morning routine.
Right, because in an agrarian or early mercantile society, the morning is prime working hours.
Absolutely. Asking people to stop what they are doing and dedicate an hour at the start of the day elevates the weight of the action. It forces a reorganization of priorities.
You cannot just fit it in the cracks of your day.
No, you have to carve out the space intentionally.
The framing of this 1712 document is incredibly intense, too. It mentions that they are in a critical juncture. It talks about hearts meditating terror, flesh trembling for fear of God, and being afraid of his righteous judgments.
They were not doing this casually at all.
Not one bit.
It is a sobering document. The authors note that past judgments are mostly forgotten, and the signs of the times are foreboding evil to come. They felt an acute sense of impending crisis.
And to combat this, they pull a precedent of their own.
They do. They reference Zechariah chapter 8, verse 21.
What is the context of that verse?
The biblical text says, "The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, Let us go speedily to pray before the Lord continually from day to day to entreat the face of the Lord."
Okay, so they were applying that literally.
Yes. The organizers in 1712 viewed themselves as the inhabitants of the metropolis, London, sending a literal message to the inhabitants of other cities in the countryside, asking them to join in this continuous structured entreaty. They were acting out the biblical pattern.
What I find so interesting is the tone they use to ask for this participation. For all the talk of terror and righteous judgments, the request itself is highly modest.
It is very humble.
Yeah, they write, "We think every modest, reasonable, and just request, such as this, should not on any account be denied us. since we are not laying a burden on others to which we will not most willingly put our own shoulders. They even call it a blessing rather than a burden.
That is a brilliant leadership strategy. They are not acting as distant administrators handing down a heavy decree from an ivory tower. They are positioning themselves as fellow laborers taking on the exact same task.
They are in the trenches with them.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. Furthermore, they anticipate the accusation that this is just some fanatical, overzealous project. They explicitly say they hope this will not be esteemed a needless step, and they do not fear being censured as fanciful and melancholy.
They ground their request in the historical reality that God hears humble, believing prayer.
They do.
And there is a postscript that addresses the exact listener concern we talked about earlier.
The fear of burnout.
Yeah, the fear of burnout or the inability to meet the rigid schedule. It says, "It is desired and hoped that if any are hindered from attending this work at the above-mentioned hour, they will nevertheless set apart an hour weekly for it."
They provide an out.
They do. They are so focused on the substance of the action that they refuse to be completely rigid about the circumstance. If you cannot do Tuesday at 7 in the morning because you are working the fields or tending to children, just pick another hour.
It demonstrates that their goal was genuine reformation, not strict legalistic compliance. They wanted the unified effort, but they understood the practical limitations of daily life.
It is very reasonable.
The postscript shows a remarkable level of grace and pragmatism. It completely removes the excuse of, well, my schedule doesn't allow it, so I guess I can't participate.
Right. If the primary method does not work for you, adopt a secondary method, but do not abandon the substance of the duty.
Exactly.
So if they are going through all the trouble of coordinating this massive, synchronized disruption to their week, what were they asking for? What was so urgent? The list of petitions gives us a vivid snapshot of the existential threats of 1712.
It really does.
They ask for deliverance from enemies, and then they use a phrase that I absolutely latched onto. They ask God for turning the counsels of all Ahithophels at home and abroad into foolishness.
That is a highly loaded biblical reference that the 18th century reader would have understood immediately.
For those who might not have 2 Samuel fresh in their minds, Ahithophel was a counselor to King David.
A very brilliant one.
Yes, his advice was considered almost as infallible as the oracle of God. He was brilliant, but he defected and joined Absalom's rebellion against David.
So he is the ultimate insider threat.
Right. So praying against the counsels of Ahithophels is praying against the most brilliant, strategic, terrifyingly competent enemies you have. You are praying for the opponent's brilliant internal strategies to collapse into absolute foolishness.
It is like modern political espionage.
It is. Can you walk us through the historical weight of these specific fears? Why were they so terrified in 1712?
To understand the weight of this document, we have to look at the political and geopolitical landscape at the end of Queen Anne's reign.
Okay, set the scene.
The succession of the crown was a massive crisis. Queen Anne had no surviving children. The Act of Settlement had designated that the crown would pass to the illustrious House of Hanover, which would secure Protestant succession.
But that succession was actively being threatened.
Heavily threatened.
Yeah.
The alternative was James Francis Edward Stuart, the Catholic half-brother of Queen Anne who was living in exile in France.
Ah, the Jacobite threat.
Yes. The 1712 document explicitly mentions praying for the securing of the Protestant succession and preventing the nation from falling to popish bigots and French slaves.
Wow, they did not mince words.
What's fascinating here is how entirely fused civil rights and religious affiliation were at the time.
Let us clarify that, because today, a person's religious affiliation might not signal a threat to civil rights, but in 1712, those concepts were tied together.
That is a vital piece of context. In the early 18th century, Catholicism was inextricably linked with the absolute monarchy of France under Louis XIV.
So it was a political system as much as a religion.
Exactly. The British Protestant parliamentary system, which guaranteed certain civil rights and liberties, was seen as directly opposed to the French model of absolute unchecked royal authority.
So to the authors of the 1712 document, a return to a Catholic monarch meant a return to absolute rule.
Right. The dismantling of Parliament, the loss of their religious freedom, and the subjection of Britain to French geopolitical interests.
So the forces aligned against the House of Hanover were the Ahithophels.
Yes, the shrewd, calculating politicians, Jacobite sympathizers at home, and foreign powers abroad, all designing a strategy to dismantle the Protestant establishment.
It is like a high-stakes modern election, but with actual armies massing across the channel and spies operating at the highest levels of government.
The organizers tightly link civil outcomes, like a happy peace or a successful war, directly with religious survival. They viewed prayer as a mechanism that could actively scramble the sophisticated diplomatic and military designs of hostile empires.
They saw civic action and spiritual discipline as two gears turning the exact same machine of history.
They really did.
And they do not just stop at the immediate political crisis, they also look forward. They ask for the influences of divine grace upon the rising generation. They specifically pray that the offspring of their Christian heroes would never become the plague of their church and country.
Which is a very sobering acknowledgement of generational drift.
It is.
They understood that you can win the immediate political battle, you can secure the succession to the crown, but if the next generation abandons the core values of the society, the victory is lost anyway.
They are trying to secure the present from external threats while simultaneously securing the future from internal decay.
It is an incredibly comprehensive list of petitions for 1 hour a week.
It really is, and Edwards includes all of this detail to make his point. He wants his readers in New England to see that real people, facing real, terrifying historical stakes, use this exact method of coordinated, scheduled action.
And the reason Edwards brings up this 1712 precedent is the outcome.
Yes, the results.
He points out that God speedily and wonderfully heard and answered those prayers. He cites the 1712 document as a proven, effective strategy.
How does he describe the answer?
Edwards records that the black clouds which threatened the nation with ruin were suddenly scattered. The state of affairs changed happily after the Queen's death by bringing King George I, securing the House of Hanover.
But the detail that caught my eye is his description of the timing. He says this deliverance happened just at the time when the enemies of the religion and liberties of the nation had ripened their designs to be put in speedy execution.
Ripened their designs.
Yeah. Why point out that the designs were ripened? It sounds like a situation that was completely unavoidable, a plan that was fully baked and ready to be unleashed.
That specific phrasing gives us deep insight into how Edwards viewed the intersection of history and providence. A ripened design implies that the enemy's strategy was not some vague, distant threat.
It was imminent.
It was fully mature, the trap was set, the resources were in place, the plan was ready to execute. From a purely human perspective, ruin was inevitable. The countdown clock had hit zero.
And Edwards highlights this to show that deliverance did not come when the threat was a decade away and easily manageable. Deliverance came right at the absolute point of execution. The sudden scattering of those black clouds through a massive political shift, the death of the Queen and the peaceful arrival of King George I, is presented not as a random coincidence of history, but as a direct, precise response to the coordinated action of the people.
Think of it like a massive, complex piece of architecture.
Yeah.
The enemy has built this towering structure of strategy and espionage, and they are just about to remove the scaffolding to let it stand on its own.
Okay, I can picture that.
But right at the moment the scaffolding drops, a precisely timed, invisible keystone is dropped into the center of the structure, causing the entire thing to collapse under its own weight.
Wow.
Edwards argues that the keystone was the synchronized agreement of people in their closets, petitioning God on a Tuesday morning.
If you are listening, I really want you to reflect on that concept. Think about times when a situation in your own life or your workplace or your community seemed completely ripened for ruin.
When it felt fully baked and unavoidable.
Right. How does coordinated, focused action interact with those kinds of outcomes? Edwards is making the case that a unified method has the capacity to intervene right at the critical juncture.
He concludes his argument by noting that this 1712 event was not an isolated incident.
There were more.
Yeah, he points out that similar proposals for scheduled agreed-upon times of action had been published in Scotland in the year 1732 and again in 1735.
So it was a pattern.
By pointing to a continuous track record, he buries the charge of novelty under a mountain of precedent.
The critic who claimed this was a new thing looks entirely uninformed by the end of his argument.
Clearly.
Let us bring all these threads together. We started with the common frustration, the resistance to new methods, the classic, we have never done it that way before.
Right.
Edwards proved that structuring and synchronizing an action is not a suspicious novelty, but a practical necessity if you actually want to execute a duty. An ideal without a schedule is just an abstract wish. By pointing to 1712 London, he showed that organizing those ideals into specific, actionable time slots has a proven track record. It takes isolated individuals and turns them into a unified force capable of altering historical outcomes.
He teaches us that we should not fear the logistics of organization. Methods and schedules do not destroy the organic nature of a movement. They give it the skeleton it needs to stand up.
And he proves that correcting past negligence will always feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is a sign of necessary reform.
It is a brilliant framework for turning abstract goals into concrete reality.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We just looked at an instance where sweeping historical shifts, the securing of a national succession, and the diffusing of ripened crises all hinged on ordinary people simply agreeing to set aside 1 hour a week on a Tuesday morning.
Just 1 hour.
If that level of basic, coordinated scheduling can intervene in the geopolitics of the 18th century, what massive shifts in your own community, your workplace, or your family might be waiting on nothing more than a simple, unified schedule? Think about how you can turn your own ideals into practicable methods this week. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.